So welcome to our Sunday celebration. I invite you in this virtual world that we're in now to close your eyes and join with us as we establish the consciousness for this Sunday morning. Place your attention on your breath and notice how magnanimous the breath is, how it's always giving of itself to its creation. It's not something we have to earn. It's not something we can lose. It's something that's always there. It breathes us in and it breathes us out and keeps us anchored in the present moment. And so by putting our attention on something as benign and as ever-present as the breath, it takes our attention away from the circumference of life, where we might get disturbed by the outer, and brings us home to a sweet peace that is always there. On my Zen calendar this week, there was a saying by Emerson, where he said, "I am the doubt, and I am the doubter, and I am the hymn of Brahman singing." And as I pondered that saying of Emerson's, I realized that simultaneously we can have doubts, we can know ourselves to be the doubter, and at the same time we can hear the hymn of God right there at the core of our being, whispering in its own language, "All is well." In my case, the voice of God says to me, "Be still, be still." And in that stillness, discover a peace that is ineffable, that is always there. And let yourself be held by this peace, it says to me. Be not afraid. And yet fears will arise, just like doubts will arise. And yet they're more in the background now, because in the foreground of consciousness is this spacious, loving presence that through skillful practice we've all cultivated through mindfulness meditation, through prayer, through whatever practice. I know beautiful Susan Orr quilts. That's got to be a meditation of its own, to sit with a needle. And so whatever our practice is, for me it's gardening, whatever that practice is, it has the potential to bring us to a space, a healthy space, where hope can spring eternal. Whenever I'm nurturing the plant in the garden, the paradox is that I'm the one that experiences the nurturing. And then I understand that beautiful principle, as you give, so shall you receive. When you become a giver, a servant for life, you receive the consciousness of that. And so we reflect on the ways that we strategize during this time that we've all been thrust upon, where the world is in chaos, where our country is experiencing an out-of-control pandemic, where leadership is severely lacking, where there is racial inequality, and yet a beautiful icon, John Lewis, made his transition yesterday, and so much beauty has come out of the testimonies to realize that he was an example for so many of us to stand up against what appears to be wrong and to deeply hear the cries of the world so that we might be an advocate for change. So we are grateful for the consciousness that is the underlying foundation upon which we maneuver. We are grateful for this expanded awareness, for an awakened consciousness that is not mired in the tyranny of the little mind, but has discovered there is a higher power that we can all access. I was listening last night to Richard Rohr do a talk on the 12-step program as one of the most profound spiritual communities on the planet. And he said where they started right, where so many religions don't, he says when you recognize you're powerless over something, then you can surrender to a higher power that can assist you in navigating when we do feel powerless. And we feel powerless, I think, in our country right now. I mean, if wearing a mask is all that I can do and distance myself, I guess I'm doing okay. But there's a sense of something out there that is dangerous. And I don't want to pretend that it doesn't exist. I want to be fully awake and aware. And yes, there's a feeling of being powerless, but there's also a feeling that I can surrender to something that can assist me. And so this Sunday morning, I invite you to do that surrendering. Surrender to this presence, to this love, to this stillness. And notice how it's always there. It doesn't go anywhere. And so if we can put our attention and be mindful of that which is always there, it has the potential to serve first ourselves and then our world. And we are the conscious co-creator with this presence. No longer creating material manifestations. Yes, we could be distracted by that. But we're seeking to manifest a deep calm and to a clarity of purpose and to a meaningfulness in life. These are all aspirations of a soul, of a jubilant and beholden soul. And so as we know ourselves as that jubilant and beholden soul, we then discover there is meaning. There is meaning that is flowering at this time on the planet. I have to know that this thing that is breaking the world apart, this pandemic, underneath it is the doorway to something so much greater. Unity consciousness, a sense of oneness flowering, a servant's heart becoming the operating system for so many. And so as we can find the blessing, even during these dark and confusing times, we then let that blessing begin to be the guiding light through which we navigate the dark times. To bless this moment, to bless this community here in Huntsville, to bless those that are our friends who can smile at us and let us know that we're in this together and we'll be fine. So I hear Andrew Cuomo, my beloved governor of New York, saying we're strong, we're tough, and we're united. What a beautiful affirmation. We're strong because we practice wearing masks and we sanitize and we practice distancing. We're tough because we don't run away. We stand tall during these times, and we meet these times with a sense of optimism that this is here to shift consciousness on the planet, and it has to start with us. And then being united as one species, as one life on this planet, loving all life, and knowing that there is a sacred ecology giving birth right now, where we're learning to love even the least of these. And so we're united in that. This is the consciousness that we celebrate, that we embody, that we express from, knowing that that assists us as we travel together on this journey to the present moment, allowing grace in all of this, knowing that grace is the unmerited givingness of the universe. We don't have to earn it, and yet it's always there. It's flowing to us, through us, as us. And as we let grace be our co-pilot, well, then we can journey safely, not knowing where we're going, but feeling empowered to continue the journey. So with this operating system in place, I invite you to take a deep breath and give a sigh as you open your eyes out there in virtual world. It's kind of fun to know that somebody out there is watching you. It's not Big Brother. No, it's just a joke. Mm-hmm. That we get to, and I was talking to Michael earlier, it's nice to have a thread that you can go to, someone you can talk to when you feel perhaps alone, you feel confused, that there's someone there who listens to you. I did something I'd never done before. Michael tapes these and puts them on YouTube, and I felt something happen to me last week when I was speaking here. I felt like this presence kind of come over me somewhere in the talk, and I wanted to see what it looked like. So I went back, and I've watched that talk 3 times, and there's a point when I felt myself being taken by this something. I think artists feel it when they get in that flow state, or dancers. I know for sure when I was a dancer I did. It's like I'm not the doer, there's something doing me, and that's the refuge that I'm trying to offer to you out there. And that's why I was so moved by Richard Rohr's talk on the 12-step program. He says they have something that nobody else has. And he says originally Christianity realized we have to acknowledge our powerlessness. He says that's a beautiful thing, because you know what we want to be in our country? He says we want to be in control. We want to be in charge. We want to have all the answers. We want to fix the world. And only when you know you're not in control, that you've never been in control, can this something that is greater than us assist us. And we're at that time right now in history. We have to learn how to surrender to this something greater. Daily, die daily, to be born into this greater sense of who we are. So I'm speaking in July on my favorite theme for the whole year, which is the subject of freedom. And the beautiful thing about freedom is that we're already free. And freedom's not something I'm looking at in form, I'm looking at it in consciousness. You can be in prison and still be free. There's a beautiful saying that says 2 men looked out of the prison cells. One saw stars and the other saw mud. So what eyes are you looking out of when you look at this world today? Are we seeing the potential and possibility for us to finally evolve and grow? I love hearing Richard Rohr speak to his fellow Christians, especially his Catholic ones. And he's saying, if we can't get our act together now, he says we're doomed. He says we got to get rid of this old idea of God in the sky and us down here and separating God and humanity. And to know that the only God that will be any meaningfulness to anyone is something that you can experience directly in yourself and around yourself. That God is everywhere. He says, then life takes on a whole different dimension. You're not separate from the world. There was that wonderful chant years ago, and I remember Michael Jackson, I think he was the one that, we are the world, we are the children, we are the ones who make a better place, so let's start giving. And to acknowledge that this, I think it was Ethiopia at the time, children starving in Ethiopia, could we come together in an open-hearted awareness to serve our connection? We're not separate. They're all our children. And I think this imperative is stronger now than it's ever been before. So what if we here at the Center for Spiritual Living, with maybe 10 people sitting out there with masks on, and I have my mask right here, and I applaud you for the courage to come out, because I know several people who are compromised, and they've let me know that they would prefer to be safe at home. But there's something about having this experience with each other that is really valuable. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. You know, one of the places that I take refuge when I get a little disoriented is in my pets. I mentioned that I have the ones that grow in the ground, all my trees and plants and flowers. And you know, it's so funny, I can get so much solace out of walking in the garden, and I noticed that the Don Juan rose, this beautiful climbing rose that never really did well for me here in Alabama, but every year it gives me one flower. And so I go out to the Don Juan rose, and I said, I don't need a huge bouquet. You gave me one flower. So I gratefully received it, and I place it in the living room, and I walk past it, and I can get its fragrance, its essence, and it feeds my soul. So what if something as simple as a flower from the garden can really be an anchor into our belonging to the universe, our belonging to life? I go over on Wednesday mornings to Jody Rutenberg's, and we do this Zoom class. And this morning when I went, or this Wednesday when I went over there, there was a new puppy that showed up in her living room. Tiny little thing. She calls her Olive. And it's funny, when Trey and I got together 45 years ago, they had a little dog named Olive. And so I had never met a dog named Olive since 45 years. So when Olive came waddling out, she had been rescued from the limestone pound, and she had udders that were dragging on the ground. She had 6 or 7 puppies, and Jody said usually at limestone they don't survive, they euthanize them. So the Friends of Rescue went there, they scooped up the puppies and found foster homes, and Jody ends up with the mother. And the mother ends up with her head on my lap. And just in sitting there and talking and petting and caressing this little dog, you can say I was giving love to the dog, but the dog was loving me. It was showing me, I've been a mother, I've taken care of my pups, now it's my turn to receive. So Jody just held that little dog in her arms, and she mothered that little dog and let her know that she'd be okay. So what if something as simple and probably as meaningless but yet meaningful as having that direct experience with a little dog was one of the ways that I hear the cries of the world? That's the title of today's talk, Hearing the Cries of the World. And it's important that we hear them. When I was in South Africa, I had a seminal moment that changed my life forever. This was in the year 1999, and the very first speaker was a black woman, African woman, whose all 5 children had died from AIDS. And I remember, and the AIDS thing was like a pandemic over there in Africa. It was just everywhere. And they didn't have the medical acumen that we do here in the States, so they were 5 children dying from AIDS. And she said, these are all our children, and we are all the mother. And just in an instant, I began to see things differently. If we're all the mother, then I'm the mother of that little dog. And that little dog is the mother of those puppies. They're all our children. Jennifer's children are my children. You want a loving thing to happen for... The trees are my children, the plants. Susan gathered a plant from her grandmother and her mother, and that becomes like your child, and as you tend to it. And so what if we are here to shift the way we see things? And to shift into this consciousness that is free. Not the tyranny of the local mind, but the expanded awareness of what Buddhists call bodhicitta, or the heart mind. Open-hearted awareness. When the heart, see, the heart knows oneness, whereas the mind wants to get into duplicity. Good, bad, right, wrong, my way, your way. But the heart basically says, you know, whatever works for you, I support that. Whatever brings you joy. You know, I have a husband who loves to gamble. I do not like gambling. I think it's one of his addictions, but he loves it. So I give him space, and so let me give you a little La Kelly. This was one of my favorite classes, Shift into Freedom. He comes through the Buddhist tradition, and he's teaching us how to go beyond the idea of being the doer to letting this presence do us. You know, we have to know we're powerless, but there's something that isn't. And so he kind of alludes to how we do that. He says here, local awareness has to find spacious awareness. So the David person, the Gigi person, the Raoul person has to find there's this spacious, awake awareness that we all access. In the science of mind, they call it the infinite mind. Eckhart Tolle calls it presence. Some people call it essence. We all share that infinite mind, that creative love. So he says our local mind is here to get us to this spacious mind. Rumi, out beyond the ideas of right thinking and wrong thinking. There is a field, and when the soul lies down in that field, which is that spacious awareness, words are not necessary. Even the idea each other does not exist. I will meet you there. They're saying the same thing that they've always said. Let's meet in that field, where Jesus would say, I and the Father are one. I and myself do nothing. I'm not the doer. All there is this spacious awareness doing everything. You see, they're all saying the same thing. But until we catch the thread, it's just a bunch of concepts and ideas. It has to be a lived reality. So here's how La Kelly says this. Our local awareness has to find this spacious awareness and then get to know the feeling of seeing and being from it. So I'm not looking out, spacious awareness is looking out. And what would spacious awareness see? That it's all me. It's not my thought over Anne-Marie's thought. No, it's just this spacious, unconditioned, awake, loving presence meeting itself in a Susan. But it's not really Susan I'm meeting the field in Susan. And that meets the field in myself. We were talking about how the ancestors are still here with us. I found a lock of hair from my teacher, Kennedy Schultz, on my desk. He died 20 years ago. And one of his well-meaning disciples, or students, came over here to Huntsville from Atlanta, and she had cut a lock of his hair off and gave it to me as a gift. And I thought, how bizarre. And I found it this morning, after 20 years, sitting on my desk next to his picture. And I don't know if he's trying to say, I'm with you always, tap into me. But Susan helped me realize that it's nice to know that we're cared for from those that are on the other dimension. When I read Emerson on my Zen calendar the other day, it took me right into the realization I can have doubts and know myself to be a mess, but I can also experience the voice of God moving through me. We don't have to be perfect. We can be flawed, and in that flawedness, we can hear the cries of the world. I had a little Zoom call with Soul Call Ministries this week, and Lisa Ferraro is putting together this ministry at this time on the planet. It's all in virtual world. And so she has even a spiritual coach that was weaving it all together. And I reluctantly got on the call, and the spiritual coach asked us to remember a time when we were little. And what did our little boy or our little girl use to help them navigate? And she said, I'll start. She said, when I was a little girl, I read the Piggly Wiggly stories, and Mrs. Hobbly Gobbly Gook or whatever, and I'd see the Wizard of Oz, and it was an anchor for me. And 5 different women expressed how their little girl found their strength going through when they were little. And when I, the last person on this call, was asked, what did your little boy do? And I said, my little boy was a mess. He was afraid all the time. He couldn't tell fantasy from reality. When he's 5, he saw Hansel and Gretel and was afraid he'd be thrown in the oven by the witch. So he was hiding under the chair in the movie theater. And his angry aunt grabbed him by the wrist and spanked him on the bottom, said he needed to toughen up. And I said, so when you asked me to remember when did I access his strength, I didn't have that founding point. And as I was remembering that little boy, I realized, how can I hear the cries of the world if I can't even hear the cries of my own little boy or my own little girl? And these are scary times that we're all in. So when something happens like this, and that is triggered within us, could we be there for that part of us and not make it bad? Take that frightened part, that doubting part, into the part of us that's whole. And if we can't do it, then we have a friend that can do it for us. She says, when local awareness discovers its spacious awareness, its job is not done then. That's just the beginning. Local awareness takes over the job previously done by our intentions and our attention. You know, those are 2 extremely powerful words. What you put your attention on, you become, and what your intention is becomes like the motivating factor for you to navigate your life. So he says, let your intention and your attention be absorbed by your local awareness, whose only job then is to assist you in moving from that field of loving, open-hearted awareness, where this is all starting. He says, the local awareness is a skillful means of focusing from spacious awareness that can intentionally focus while maintaining an open-hearted view. It sounds gobbledygook, but it isn't really. Our local attention, where we have choice. You know, and the science of mind says you cannot live a choiceless life. Every moment you're making a choice. Well, here he's saying the choice is, what operating system are you going to come from? Are you going to come from a local self who has ideas and concepts and beliefs, and then get dogmatic around it? We have that all over the planet, you know, which is the local mind running the show. Or are you going to surrender, knowing that really that local mind is powerless, to something that is so powerful by it's not operating in a thought-based system. It's operating in a knowingness. Susan has this deep knowingness that she carries around. It's like the ocean. And when the waves of turbulence want to appear, she realizes that right within that wave of turbulence, there is that ocean of serenity. So what if, in shifting from local awareness, or from the waves of thought, we're shifting into a spaciousness of knowing and being and okayness? Last week I spoke about the yes of the universe. We're living in this yes. Bring it on, whatever it is. If it's fear, if it's a lock of hair from my teacher, yes to that. If it's a little dog who just came from the pound, who needs to be held, say yes to that. If it's a plant on the front porch that hasn't been watered in a week and looks like it's dying, say yes to that plant. Not it's a horrible thing, I was a little neglectful, and I'll be more mindful. Could I let the bells of mindfulness ring in my life so that I'm more part of the solution than the problem on this planet? My teacher, the one whose hair I found, he used to say, you cannot solve all the world's problems. He says, just to try to make sure you're not one of them. He had that great sense of humor. And I think that's appropriate now. He says, local awareness knows from within its new location. Instead of feeling the location of the perceiver behind your eyes in your head, for instance, when local awareness travels to your hand, it knows directly from within the hand. It knows from within the heart. It knows from within the belly. What does this feel like? So this awareness doesn't come from just this little thought process. And when it moves to your emotions of sadness or joy, it knows from within those feelings. Could I allow the sadness? Could I allow the grief? And by opening to the grief and the sadness, I find there is a consoling energy right there in the middle of it. And had I denied the sadness and the grief, I wouldn't have found it. He says, like a spotlight, local awareness has the ability to focus in one area. Local awareness can become small or it can expand to a larger area. Local awareness can move. It can become identified or disidentified. It lights up its location from within. And when awake awareness is this primary operating system, we can remain spacious and open while simultaneously focusing on a particular task. He said, imagine local awareness as a wave that arises from the ocean of spacious awareness. And it never really stops being the ocean. The ocean is its essence. So he's offering us this place of freedom is not in the local mind, but it's in the non-local mind. Now, when we do spiritual mind treatment here at the Center for Spiritual Living, what we're doing is we're shifting into non-local mind. We're shifting out of the wave into the ocean. And what happens when you do that, it's not about you anymore. It really was never about you. It's how can I be a conduit through which this oceanic presence, through this divine love, through this clarity of intention and purpose, can move through me. And when I can find it within myself, then I can see it in you. It isn't how we potentiate one another. It's like a tuning fork. If I can vibrate with a higher frequency, then the invitation is join me in that frequency and let's vibrate together in open-hearted awareness, in a loving presence. My little husband, he's passionate about saving the trees. And so he created a poster because they're cutting them down in 5 points. And the poster says, do you like shade? Question mark. And then there's a big tree. And then it says, thank the tree. And it says, we need more of them. Spread the word. Just we need more of them. Not you're a bad person for not planting a tree, but we just need more trees. And you know, it's so funny. It's hot as blazes here in Alabama. And I've got 2 old pups. And they love their walks. And so they go to the back door with their leashes and they say, Daddy, I want to go for a walk. And I say, well, we have to find a shady place to walk because the asphalt on your paws would be unbearable. And so I'm constantly looking for places to navigate my 2 old dogs, shady streets, shady alleyways, and I find myself going up to those trees and thanking them. So just by raising consciousness, I says, Trey, you're not going to change the world. He said, but if I can awaken humanity to save 1 tree, maybe, to trim it up, to learn how to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And those simple little things can be very meaningful in a life that sometimes seems to be out of control. Not that you're going to be in control, but at least you have a way to navigate. You know? I came to the center early this morning and I was looking for some inspiration on hearing the cries of the earth. And the first book I see is a book called Spiritual Ecology, and it's called The Cry of the Earth. And this is a compilation of maybe 20 different essays from some of the most enlightened teachers on the planet about how with the severe problems we're having on Earth right now, there has to be a consciousness that wakes up. One of them is Thich Nhat Hanh, who said, we have to get the bells of mindfulness ringing. We have to be able to hear the cries of the earth. We have global warming. We have in Mongolia, the land is on fire in Mongolia. The permafrost is falling down. Trey pulled out a survey yesterday, and of course, we have 50 states in the United States, and they've ranked them. Who are most ecologically friendly states, and who are the worst states? Well, of course, the state of Alabama was down there, I think, 43rd. Maine was, I think, the first. And so, of course, then he gets adamant, we have to move. And I said, no, we just need to raise the consciousness in here in Alabama. So what if it's not about pretending it doesn't exist anymore? We have to speak the truth. When something is insane, we have to say, no, that's not acceptable anymore. Even if it's something as simple as planting a tree. So let me get you, at the very end of the book, Llewellyn, he talks about how our response should be. When you hear the cries of the earth, What should our response be? And he says, how do we respond in a world where there's such a crisis? He says, how can we awaken from the dream of forgetfulness? Now, in Sufism, they talk about spirituality as forgetting and remembering. When we forget who we are, you know, there's a line, Hanuman. Hanuman was the servant of Ra, which is God in Hinduism. And Hanuman, he's the little monkey guy. You see him in the iconography. He has his little heart open. And he's a little monkey with his heart open. He's surfing the heart. And he says, when I forget who I am, I serve God. And when I remember who I am God. That's subtlety. So he's saying the same thing. Could we remember that everything is divine? We forget that it's all God. If all there is God, then God is in the tree, God is in the otter, God is in your neighbor, God is in the enemy. It's all God. So he's trying to get, we will only have a sacred ecology when we realize our planet is sacred. We're not here to take dominion over it and dominate it like they thought in the Old Testament. No, we're here to serve it because it is serving us. So here's the response from a Sufi guy. He said, it's time for us to listen to the cries of the earth. And he says, we then may hear the cry of the world and its call to us personally. Trey heard the call from the trees. Jody hears the call from the four-leggeds. Right? This is not just a call of creation as its physical ecosystem is being destroyed, but it's the cry of the world soul. Now, Llewellyn, he speaks about the anima mundi, which is the soul of the world. You know, what does it profit man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? So could we, in our nurturing of our soul, see, the ego wants answers, the soul wants meaning. Could we find meaning in all of this and awaken the soul of the world, not just our soul? So he's putting the two together. This is not just a call of creation as its physical ecosystem is being destroyed, but the cry of the world soul, the anguish of the anima mundi, which means the world soul, as it feels its sacred substance being depleted and its light going out. He said, we will each hear this cry in our own way, as it touches our own soul. But what matters is how we respond. You know, John Lewis, I've been watching these tributes to him, and John Lewis says you must move into action. It's one thing to say, I believe in Black Lives Matter, but you must be willing to stand up for that. So even in the last days of his life, when he was in pain from cancer, he would speak to the young people that were protesting peacefully in the Black Lives Matter movement. And the one that really touched me was one person said, what should I do when they're shooting rubber bullets at it and tear gassing us and trying to, and we're just standing there peacefully. And John Lewis said this to that young person. He says, keep going until you can give no more. And then they told a story about him when they had the shooting at the nightclub, the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, and the shooter went in and was killing all those gay people. John Lewis the next morning did a sit down in Congress, in the House of Representatives, for 24 hours. And Andrea Mitchell was saying, I remember, he said, for those who are with me, who want to stand up and say this is not acceptable, that you will kill our gay brothers and sisters. And so he did a sit down in the House of Representatives. That's putting action to your commitment. Anyway, he says we need to respond both outwardly and inwardly. We need to work to heal both the body and the soul of the world. Yes, you need inward action, which is what we do here at the center, but you also need to move it out into outward action. I think Susan started making masks the first day that this thing happened. And here's our little quilter now going in the mask business. The first step is always to recognize what is happening. We don't want to put our head in the sand and pretend this does not exist. This is very, very real. And for those people who think, oh, we can just mass, what do they call it? Mass infect ourselves and we'll be over it. That's not acceptable for someone who's had a heart attack to say that. He says we need to relearn the wisdom of listening to life and feeling the heartbeat of life and sensing that all life is sentient with a soul. And first there is a pressing need to reconnect matter and spirit. You know, we like to separate them. I remember in the Science of Mind it says we move into the absolute to the degree that we move out of the relative. And then what you've done is you've separated heaven and earth. And he says we've got to recognize that was wrong thinking, that the relative is the absolute at the level of the relative. So even though we are these finite selves, within the doubter and the doubt, there is the hymn of Brahman singing itself. Put spirit and matter together is what Llewellyn is saying. He says all of life is sacred, and every breath and every stone is sacred. And this is one of the great secrets of oneness. Everything is included. And within our heart and within our soul, we can reconnect with this primal knowing that the divine is present in everything. It has to start right there within us. The thing you're looking for, if you're looking for God, it's God within you that's looking for itself. And when that begins to awaken, oh my God, it was this presence within me all along that was wanting to be seen and felt and heard and known as my own very self. You have to be so humble to know that it's not me, it's that. That's being a conduit. And he goes on to say, here's a simple prayer for the earth. And this is something we can all do. He says, the act of placing the world as a living being within our hearts when we inwardly remember the divine. I remember when I was studying with Llewellyn, he would use this metaphor. And he'd say, I invite you to place this world that is suffering so much right now into your hearts. And then offer that to the beloved. This beloved that we all share. Because we might feel powerless, but there's that which doesn't feel powerless. Could we be crazy enough, hopeful enough, to say, I'm turning this over to God right now? Yeah, that's what he's saying. Turn it over. We become aware in our hearts of the sorrow and the suffering of the world. And we ask that this divine love and this healing flow go where it's needed. Go to the borders where those kids are in cages. Let them know that they're loved and held. And through our prayers, the power of the divine will help us and help the world and help bring the earth back into balance. He goes on to develop all these strategies, how to bring the sacred back into life. One of them is, he says, go for a walk in nature and let nature inspire you with wonder. He says, go out in the middle of the night and look up at the stars and realize, oh my God, we're in an infinite universe. Or go and lie in water and feel how the water is supporting you. My prayer partner, we spoke this morning, and he's on a body of water he's got a little boat in Vancouver. And he said, it's so beautiful here today. And he went up on the water. I thought of you, Gigi, and he said, I always feel supported and held by the water. So what if something as simple and as benign as sitting on his boat and feeling the water supporting him was saying, nature is always supporting me. Could I support nature? So he's saying, let yourself be filled with wonder by going to your old tree that you planted from a cutting and have communion with that tree. He says, Thich Nhat Hanh says, we have to learn to walk in a sacred manner. When I studied with Thich Nhat Hanh, it was 10 days right after my mom died and my teacher died. And he kept talking about a transmission and that we transmit each other and that we're all this invisible something. And then he would say, Thich Nhat Hanh, the miracle is not to walk on water as Jesus was reputed to have done. The miracle is not to walk on fire as they're doing in so many fire walking ceremonies. He says the real miracle is to walk on earth where every step is a blessing as you're moving. So Llewellyn's saying the same thing. Practice sacred walking, where you're literally affirming that right where you stand is holy ground. That these are, and when you go for a walk, touch a tree and say to the tree, I hear you. Or, we have a dog right across the street. His name is Ranger. He's like 200 pounds. He's huge. And he thinks it's his job to protect the neighborhood. And he barks and he barks. But when I go out there, he walks over to the edge of the fence. Well, you're going to come over and say hello. You know what? I see you're all day protecting the neighborhood. I just want a little scratch on the ears. So I waddle over to the street, and Ranger puts his big paws up on the fence, and I scratch his ear. And we have this communion. So what if something as simple as that reminds me? And I tell his owner, I said, he's such a wise, gentle dog. And she said, do you hear how crazy he goes? I said, he thinks he's here to protect you. Animals think they have a job. I know that very, very well. And Ranger lives with a single woman who's fearful. She bolts her doors. Of course he thinks she's afraid. He can pick up on that energy. He's a dog, of course sake. Dog spelled backwards. You know what that is. So his last little thing he says, when we hear a morning chorus of birds, and I have them in my yard every morning, we may sense there's a deeper joy of life and awaken to its divine nature. And he says at night, he says, go out and look at the stars and remind yourself what is infinite and eternal within us and within the world. And watching this simple wonder of a dawn or a sunset can be an offering in itself. Whatever way we are drawn to wonder, to recognize the sacred, what matters is always our attitude that we bring to these intimate exchanges. And for me, it should be an attitude of gratitude. When you see the little birds in their nest, and you see them getting stronger and starting to fledge, you've done a good job. It is through the heart that the real connection is made. And then this connection comes alive, a live stream that flows from our hearts, and it embraces all of life. Then every step, every touch will be a prayer for the earth and a remembrance of what is sacred. Every step will be a prayer, a remembrance that we're in this together, that we're all the mother, and these are all our children. It's a big task. Are you willing to do it? Mission impossible. I'm going to ask you to find the sacred in the smallest of things. You know, to open to the hymn of Brahman as it reveals its message to you, uniquely to you. Each one of us is here to do that. Lastly, I want to close with Jeff Foster, his book, The Joy of True Meditation. And I realized that I can't do this, hear the cries of the earth, until I can hear the cries of my own self. And so he does a beautiful little meditation on how to be there for you, so that when you feel unsafe, insecure, and we'll use that as our inspiration for the closing meditation. Tickle in my throat. Okay. He calls this love's deeper commitment. He said it's important that we tell the truth to ourselves and to each other, and that we commit to presence, commit to meeting in the fire of what's going on today, to know each other and to let ourselves be known, to walking a path of healing wherever it may take us. And he said, we do not need the old security of the way we used to do things in the old normal. He said, let's make a deeper commitment, one that cannot be broken or lost, to love itself. Let's make a commitment to presence. Let's make a commitment to meeting in the here and now. Let's make a commitment to bringing and showing all of ourselves to the world. A commitment to tell the truth today, knowing that our truth may change tomorrow. Committed to listening to each other. Committed to bowing before each other's experience, even if our hearts are broken and tender, even if we are triggered in the deepest pain in each other and a most profound disappointment. Let us commit to meeting our own pain and to open to the great yes of life. He said, love is a field, it's not a form. So let us commit to the field of love. Remember that the field is in every moment of our precious day on earth, and devote ourselves to this field of love, to this eternal now. And when our eyes open, and when we are awake, we live very, very close to life, very close to death, very close to insecurity, very close to loss. But this is where we find such great aliveness, on the edge of things, where everything is always new, where we are constantly surprised by ourselves and each other, this tremendous sense of being alive. You know, we can only know our aliveness by opening up to that which is not alive, that which is suffering. So what if the possibility for all of us is to be that holding space for the world? I hear that song, we are the world, we are the children, we are the ones who make a better place, so let's start giving. So I invite you to give your time right now, to give your heart. Give your heart to the world that is suffering. And see your heart opening. And invite the suffering into your heart. Because it's not your heart, it's the heart of the world that we're all sharing right now. And so there are children on the border that are suffering. There are people with this COVID-19 that are suffering. There are family members that are concerned and quarantining. There is our planet Earth, which is going through a troubled time right now. And we put it all within ourselves. And we breathe. And there's something about being held in the hands of grace, forever safe in the arms of love. Like a child who needs protection from a mother's warm embrace, we are held in the hands of grace. And so in my mind's eye, I see that little dog in Jody's arms, who was taking care of her pups in a cage, no doubt, who's now held in the arms of a loving person, letting her know that I hear you, I see you, I am you. that we're all connected in this. And so as we can open our hearts to even the least of these, we become a part of that shift into freedom. The freedom to love unconditionally. Even the stuff that doesn't feel so lovable. Notice yourself in this moment. Are you in that field of unconditional love, or are you still in the tiger of the mind? And could you know through a simple surrendering process that I'm nothing? It's this presence that's everything. And could I surrender into that presence? That higher power, if you will. That field of unconditional, awake, aware love that we all share. And know that as a homing place, as a holding place, as a place that you take refuge in, a place where you can rest and say all is well, and I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for our world. It's only going to resolve through love. I know that. Love is the way. Love has always, will be forever the way. And so I offer my consciousness, my heart, to this shift in consciousness. And I invite everyone out there to join with me in realizing this place of union, this place of oneness. One life, God's life, revealing itself endlessly anew through all of her creation. And we are that creation. In great humility, in great gratitude, I invite you to join with me in the heart salutation by saying, I honor you. I respect you. I love you. You are an aspect of myself. The beloved in me bows to the beloved in you. In this place we are one. And from that beloved presence within you that we all share, open your eyes, and now open your hands and open your hearts, and symbolically let that love spread itself all over the world, saying, I hear you, I see you, and I'm here to embrace you right now. This is palpable. So thank you.